welcome to Slash Forward, into another week where we celebrate letting it all hang out under the light of the full moon, in this case by stalking through the film late phases, aka Night of the Wolf. Consider hitting the like button to connect with others looking to add to their pack. Let's get to it. We open Bad Moon style, as a man with a well-trained shepherd haggles over the cost of a headstone. Ambrose drives a hard bargain and ultimately elects to walk away and consider his options, a demonstration of his huge nads. His son Will then brings them to the next stop on their list of errands that day, moving into the assisted living facility where he'll while away the remainder of his days. They arrive ahead of the movers, so Ambrose takes little time acclimating himself to his new surroundings, which includes meeting and ingratiating himself to his new neighbor.
I can't see you, but you smell beautiful.
Damn, girl, you don't even know. He asks Dolores for help identifying the wall treasure he pulled from his rental, and she thinks it looks like a claw, and she would know as she's ready to claw his clothes clean off. The welcoming committee arrives sometime later, but this grizzled war vet doesn't appreciate the intrusion, and his generally sour attitude is carried over by Shadow as they show their guests the way out. Later that night, Dolores gets a call from her daughter while a lurker snoops outside. Ambrose, a light sleeper due to the nightmares that live in his memory, is awoken from his slumber by strange raspy breathing sounds. Dolores' daughter disconnects right as something starts banging on her front door, and after she refuses to answer, it busts in and causes a huge ruckus. Ambrose listens through their shared wall and tries to see if he can be of assistance, but she's predisposed and their visitor knocks him back. Shadow then runs off after it as Ambrose tries to get to his guns. He manages to get his hands on one and get it loaded, but the mysterious beast has already run off. When he finds Shadow, he makes a hopefully not premature assessment that the wounds are mortal and puts his loyal friend out of his misery. The next morning, the movers finally show up and discover that they've walked into a bit of a personal situation for those involved. Will and Ann are called in and they take Ambrose to the vet, which is, of course, where veterans go to receive medical care. He confirms he could tell the animal that got at them was a dog by smell, and she reveals that they get monthly calls about attacks like this and warns about living so close to the woods. After all is said and done, he elects, for some reason, to bring Shadow home with him. When they get home, Dolores' daughter lets slip that there have been rumors about this place. Despite this info, the police are treating the event as a basic animal attack, which means no investigation and no further actions taken. It's just nature being nature, y'all. As Ambrose makes preparations for burying his companion, Anne remarks about all the unusual and high-strung people they've run across that day.
Must be the full moon.
And it resonates with him. He rolls this around in his mind, coming to the conclusion that he's essentially safe for the next month, while the moon is less than full. So the kids head out and he remains behind, unperturbed. But even though he has time, he also knows he's got to keep his gun clean and his wits sharp. When the mailman happens upon him the next day, Ambrose kindly requests a walking tour of the blood trail that was left by the prior evening's attack. When they arrive at the end of the road, he finds himself at the Baker residence. He approaches the home to make himself acquainted with the residents therein. He's already familiar with Gloria from the welcoming committee, but he hasn't yet met her husband John. However, when he finds him, he learns that he's relegated to the confines of an iron lung, the result of an old tennis injury. As he makes his way home, he mulls over what to make of this development. When he arrives home, the police are there to greet him, letting him know that some residents have complained about his roaming freely about the parcels, and if it comes to it, he's happy to make it his mission to keep Ambrose firmly within his lane. Before they leave, he asks about a flyer left at his house and is told about the weekly shuttle that brings the old folks to St. Anthony's every Sunday. That weekend, he waits patiently, his shovel acting as his new walking stick, for the bus to arrive. When he boards, you can hear the old blue hairs clucking jealously when he pulls a seat next to Father Smith, securing his spot in heaven. They do their best to engage in pleasantries with this unpleasant, brutish man, while Father Smith hacks up a lung straight into his hand like a savage, ensuring a virulent communion. Unfortunately, for the first-timers in the audience, the father has scheduled an impassioned diatribe about the necessity of difficult sacrifice, a tough sermon that even gets the neighborhood dogs all riled up. Ambrose finds the father out sinning afterwards and bums a cig off him. The father tries to relate with Ambrose about how his brother also went away to Nam, but it becomes painfully obvious that he himself is a tender normie. Regardless, Ambrose confides that none of this matters now because he doesn't plan on being around much longer.
I will not participate.
Well, who asked you to? As the days come and go, we watch Ambrose spend his time counting out his steps and learning the new layout, doing some more grave digging out back, wandering in the rain, keeping things fit and trim for the ladies, and, of course, practicing his shovel tai chi down by the waterbed. Meanwhile, we also see the ladies from the welcoming committee looking into getting him ejected from the bus for their own presumed safety, meaning, of course, that they really suck at their job. Before long, he's on another field trip with the kids. This time, he finally selects a proper headstone, and it's a beaut. While settling up, he pegs the salesman as the kind of guy who could recommend a good gun shop in town. Then they drop him off where he continues to dig Shadow's grave. As he does so, he's approached by a shrouded figure. His first instinct is that Will forgot something and came back, but the old sniffer says otherwise. So he puts the guy down with his shovel and runs to retrieve his gun. When he excitedly returns to show it to him, all that's left is a smelly old scarf. The police confirm that no one witnessed the attack, but there is evidence of an intruder as he took the time to kill a couple of dogs on his way out of the neighborhood. Ambrose also makes note here that the scarf smelled like smoke and was spun from fine merino wool. So you may want to write that down. The next day, the bus continues on without him, and Mr. Griffin acts as his personal escort. Along the way, we learn that Jim's been with the church for a couple of decades, knows the father well, and owes him everything. Even his sweet ride. He keeps that tucked in his back pocket, but is primarily interested in probing the father. He shares some stories about how much of a badass he is to see if maybe Father Smith will open up with some of his darkest secrets. But the father is just too good at playing it close to the chest. Ambrose isn't totally sure what to make of him, but then discovers that Jim seems to have a curious, familiar rattle in his breathing after taken to a coughing spell. Later on, his new headstone is delivered, and the driver agrees to give him a ride into town. He meets up with the gunman to see about putting in a request for some specialized ammo made of silver. He asks if Westmark's ever known anyone to put in an order like that before, and he confirms that he did receive a similar request about a year ago. But we cut to old Jim, putting some calming salve on a few pretty fresh-looking wounds, before heading out back to get to work tossing some rotted dog carcasses from his collection into the incinerator. Then he tidies himself up to embark on another leaflet canvas for the church, even though they already basically count the entire retirement community among their rank. He happens to be on Ambrose's block when Ambrose returns from his errands and seems to recognize his bullet sack. That night, Ambrose finally lays Shadow to rest, and then inside he pulls out on his son, who cowers in the dark like a soft boy. Will complains about the state of the house, but his father assures him that he has a system set up that suits him just fine. With the pleasantries behind them, Will drops the bomb that Anne is pregnant, and they've decided they want to move closer to her family. The bittersweet departure turns sour when Will reveals that he knows Ambrose didn't put his ring in Mom's casket like he said, and this deceit cuts deep enough that he had also already determined that he was going to wash his hands of his father anyway. So take that, Daddy. Elsewhere, Mr. Griffin appears in a resident's home in the middle of the night and asks them to bend a knee with him. Clarissa touches the men with her heartfelt words, and he repays her with a playful nibble of the wrist. The next morning finds Jim at Emmy's house, where he asks politely to take her hand, and she complies in a classic old lady manner.
Oh, all right.
But he really meant to take it, and she can't shut up about it, so he sees himself out. Later on, Father Smith finds James out back completing some ascetic rituals as penance for his bad behavior, but he confides that these efforts are fruitless and grows increasingly despondent as night falls. His life has been filled with nothing but failed absolution. After that fateful evening, he went out to hunt the beast. It drew first blood, and now he finds himself unable to rid his body of the curse, which is what happens if you're injured but don't die. From that point, stripping flesh from bone becomes just a part of the natural order for you. And anyway, he's just letting the father know, so while he's being slaughtered, he understands that his full death is actually an act of great mercy. Ambrose notes a distinct increase in the distress level of the neighborhood dogs, which we find to be directly proportional to the degree to which James is ripping off his titties. The father's like, "You okay, bro?" and stands over him to bear witness to as much as he can tolerate, which ends up being a bit too much, as when he goes to leave, James is now transformed and ready to show off his standing long jump to claim his first victim. Being out and about already, Ambrose starts at the Baker residence, where he finds that Mrs. Baker is also a werewolf, and they trade torso injuries. But you have to do more than perforate the bowels of this grizzled old vet to keep him down. He gets home to dress his wounds, say goodbye to his son via answering machine, and then finalize the preparations he's been making these last few weeks. When ready, he opens the window and chums the waters outside, using a cranked up hearing aid to detect their approach. Turns out the neighborhood has a full-on infestation of wolf people, as we see them congregate outside. Ambrose manages to hit one just below the breast, and and then gets a perfect headshot on another that tries to hop up and peekaboo him. Downstairs, he mangles his toes, but ultimately manages to take out another. Despite his success, they keep coming to him, providing him the chance to use his shotgun to turn this one's head into a bloomin' onion. Meanwhile, Will has arrived at the neighborhood to take back everything he said, but has some difficulty getting past the main gate. He tries to call his father, but he's a little tied up right now, requiring him to hop the fence and head in. Ambrose then goes outside for the final battle and carefully counts off his steps so he can spring his trap. However, when this fails, he has to think back to what he practiced on the shore all those warm summer mornings. And after a little back and forth, he keeps his cool and evens out the playing field before landing the kill shot. When all is said and done, he takes a breath in his rocker as Will works his way through the carnage toward him. When he arrives, he finds his father in death exactly as he lived. Unresponsive. We end on a scene of Ambrose's funeral with the voiceover from his voicemail, apologizing to Will for all the mistakes he made as a father, and we're left to wonder with no indications whatsoever as to whether or not he intends to remain dead. I have a website set up where you can support the channel through donations or merch. I'd like to give a huge thanks to my donors memorialized in the Hall of Headshots. I get the impression that Late Phases receives some criticism for its wolf effects. While they aren't top tier necessarily, I do think they did a good job with what they had, and worked around their limitations by keeping things story-based and adeptly directing around it. They also made me completely forget about budgetary limitations around the transformation scene by going in hard with the peeling skin. It was a very effective set piece. Another thing that I appreciated was that, while these werewolves seem to be a little underpowered in comparison to other movies like this, they didn't suffer from inconsistent power levels. Whereas in some other films, the wolf may be introduced as an unkillable superhero, but by the end of the movie, the protagonists are holding their own in hand-to-hand combat, and that can be somewhat annoying. If you enjoyed the video, I'd love for you to become a part of the channel by subscribing. Thanks for watching.